And that was a place that openly welcomed white clientele as well as the black clientele. And it was a place that actually the city closed down in 1943 for 6 months when the war effort was getting really serious and claiming about for vice on the dance floor, prostitution rings on the dance floor. And there's a quote in the book here because I think that people up in Harlem said, hey, they're not doing the same thing when there's prostitution on the dance floor of the Midtown ballrooms. But I think there's a common theme through the book that music does attract. It's a refuge for a lot of people, and it does attract people who are from any walk of life, but any color and any sexual persuasion, but who really don't fit in with mainstream society, often find their release in the music. And one thing that seems quite common in this book is that the New York music scene is several years ahead of the New York political scene. I mean, that does seem to be the case. You were saying about being alienated from other movements. If we move back from the gay liberation back to like your involvement in the Yippies. I mean, did you, the Yippies they had an office on Union Square East, is that right? Right by Max's, were active on the Lower East Side. Did you find that to be actually a homophobic movement just for all its politics?
Yeah. Yeah, and they were all homophobic, and some of my best friends were incredibly homophobic. But this is why Stonewall was significant for me. That night when I was a witness outside by happenstance, I was coming home from working at Columbia, which is to answer your Max's Kansas City. I was on my way home to go to Max's Kansas City, but I saw a police car and a few people in front of the Stonewall Inn, okay? And I wandered over, and you have to know the cultural context. If a white radical saw two black people, two brown people arguing with a cop, they would have called all their friends over to be a support, system. So I remember going to the phone and calling every left organization, every anti-war organization, every group that I had been involved with, and said, I may have used the word riot, there's a riot going on. And,
So you said there's a rebellion going on.
No, I might have used the word riot because we had all been together in the Newark, the Yippies went over, Abby and I and a group of people went over and handed out free food in the middle of the Newark riots in Newark, and I got arrested, and that's another whole story. But no one came. Not a single person responded. And it was a big wake-up call to me that, I had to identify with this particular moment because it was, in a sense, my coming out politically. I had never been closeted. Everyone knew I was gay, but I was the nice gay, Abby used to always bring over women. I had my boyfriend, Howie Weinraub, who was Annie Flanders' brother, at the loft on Bond Street, and he would bring over these women to introduce me to go out with them, and my boyfriend would say, why is he doing that, so it was homophobic, and, like many gay and lesbian people who were motivated by the forces of change in the 60s, who worked in the anti-war movement, particularly the anti-war movement or the anti-racist movements. We just, figured, okay, that's just the way of life. That's what the significance of Stonewall is. Not that Stonewall was the only place that happened, but the significance was that the media told the world about Stonewall so that gay and lesbian people all over the world knew that something had changed for them. By the way, I want to put the Chambers Brothers in this mix here too. Time. It's a classic sort of song from that period of change, and that very simple syncopation with the reverb on the cymbal could have also been, as much as Diana Ross and et al. At the Stonewall could have also been the soundtrack that was going on that night, just as Martha and the Vandellas, in the streets. Let's
talk. Well, in the streets. That's something I didn't get into the book, and so it's a fun thing to talk about here. I do talk about the Lower East Side. Again, I know we're not talking specifically about bands and records, but that's all in the book. I think it's more fun to talk generally in more general terms. But I do talk in the book about the hippies moving into Tompkins Square Park. Ed Sanders has had his P-side bookstore and is now kind of regretting it, and then he's told to take it back over, and then the kid is murdered. You were active at that point with the Yippies. What was it? St. Mark's Place. You did an event that was. You go ahead.
Well, we did the Death of the Hippie event, for one thing, which was a mirror of an event that had happened in San Francisco. But that police riot that took place in Thompson Square Park, 15 people were arrested. 8 of them were sent to the hospital, and they were literally sitting on a grassy mound, and the shit was beat out of them, you know. And it was again, here's a wake up call that the peace and love was a myth. That it was, and also a lot of speed had come into the picture. It was no longer psychedelics and love and obviously acid. There was a lot of speed, which meant that organized crime had figured out how to get this market up and running. And speed is a very different drug. And I liked speed, by the way. I learned to get off of it, but it was a very different drug, and the economic situation was becoming difficult. This is at the same time as this war machine is going on and on and on. So the death of the police riot in Thompson Square Park, and then Groovy and Linda. Groovy was very typical of a lot of working class kids who had heard Timothy Leary's message of drop out, you know, tune in and drop out, and they came to New York. Although it was a very different economic climate at that time. I remember my apartment cost $97 a month. You could live here cheaper. New York was not. Most of our apartments are not big enough for communes, unlike San Francisco, which had much larger spaces. And the loft movement was not very evolved at that time. Even the artist loft movement wasn't very evolved. So a lot of things were against these kids that were coming into the Lower East Side. And speed is a wonderful drug if you have no money and you have no place to stay, you don't get hungry, and you don't fall asleep, you know. So, you know, it was one of those kinds of drugs. So those two events told people like myself, you know, see, the yippies were really founded in a way to try to take hippie culture and all the good values of hippie culture and politicize it because of the war movement that was going on. Abbey had come out of the anti-racist movement. I was doing a thing called the Communication Company, which was a street paper, which was an organizing tool in the Lower East Side, and he was very impressed with that because he couldn't get any traction with his movement, so he became my buddy, and we were able to then organize through the yippies a couple of things that were very important. One, that it was fun. Now, this has to do with music and pop life and club life and the B-ends. You know, life should be fun. It can't just be all work and no play. Our pleasure principle was very important. And music was very erotic. You know, there's the best of music and all the genres that Tony covers in this book. The bottom line, for me anyway, and when I ran clubs, it was always the same. People, particularly in New York, they can't invite people into their houses for the most part to have parties. They would go out to clubs with the hope of maybe getting laid. A very healthy, you know, idea. And it's not this time, but I know in my clubs, I wanted to provide a safe space for people to feel comfortable about those choices, and particularly for women and gay people to say no, you know, as well, because everything else had been about women having to say yes, you know.
Well, one thing I like about what you were saying is a kind of credo there. When I'm writing about the Fugs in this book, for example, you know, the Fugs were, and we mentioned Ed Sanders, were very, very, while we're talking about this period, very, very political, but we're clearly trying to have some fun with it. And
absolutely,
right, I
but
mean,
they were poets.
Yeah.
You see, the poets always have some, I think, extra insight into how to provoke things up in a way, you know.
Where did we're talking about this period, so the yippies are happening. We're talking about the Lower East Side and what's going on there. In the middle of Union Square is Max's Kansas City, and this is a mainstay for a long time. It's not literally a nightclub where bands play per se in the way that they did at CBGB's, for example, or the Cafe Go-Go, which you mentioned earlier. But it's a central point because I make the comment in the book that Max's was a place where you had the chance, I guess, to see Abby Hoffman break bread with Andy Warhol. And you were at Max's, and how did that mingle in all the scenes? I mean, where did the Velvet Underground stand in all of this in 1968 while the whole yippie thing is going on? Where does Warhol stand? What's Max's
Well,
doing?
Number one, I don't think Andy and Abby ever broke bread in the back room of Max's Kansas City, quite frankly. But I was a regular at Max's from in the middle 60s, which was really the great days of Max's Kansas City.